Hey everybody, this is Brenda Devine from Purpose 8 Institute, and you're listening to my podcast, Living a Life of Purpose, where we discuss the importance of purpose in our everyday lives. Discovering and living out your purpose keeps you focused on God's purpose. That is sharing the good news of salvation with others. This podcast is for people like me, still searching for the answers to who am I and why am I here? You and I were designed and created by God for purpose, and we have much to do. You can listen and subscribe to my podcast, Living a Life of Purpose with Brenda Devine on Anchor and all other podcast platforms. Hey, this is Brenda Devine from Purpose 8 Institute. Hey, thank you so much for joining me once again as we talk about the journey of living a life of purpose. So today's topic is fear. And I want to have a conversation about how fear impacts the believer. How we can allow fear to hem us up, to distract us, to refocus us away from our purpose, to be consumed with what people think, say, just the whole element of fear, being uncomfortable in this new way of living, this new process of your life. Fear is uncomfortable. Learning new things, being challenged, thinking new ways. Initially, it can be uncomfortable. It can, for some people, fear can make them just stand still and just go, no, I don't want to do that. And for others, fear can push them to do things that they never thought that they would do. And when I'm talking about fear, I guess you could say that the initial fear is a negative fear. But there's also a fear of reverence, a fear of God, that you've discovered your purpose, you're acting on your purpose, you're trying to figure it out, you're trying to understand what God wants you to do. And for some of us, including me, it's not like you have a day-to-day conversation with God and He's telling you exactly what you need to do step by step. There is a relationship that you have, and you know in this relationship with God, you have an overall understanding that He wants you to love, to serve, to be a disciple, to be righteous, to align yourself to His will. You've got that understanding that in this relationship, there are things that you are to do that God expects from you. But when we find ourselves in a place like I did a few years back, I found myself positioned face to face with fear. My biggest fear is money. And I'm over analytical, type A personality, have to analyze everything. And faith doesn't allow for that. And that it was a big struggle for me. The biggest struggle for me was the fear of not being in control of my finances, fear of controlling my finances, which essentially is fear of me not being in control, or thinking that I'm in control when really I'm not in control, or I wasn't in control. So, and I know I've shared this before about me looking at a building and making an offer on it, and it was more than what I could afford. And I had to reconcile myself to the being obedient to what I believe God had asked me to do. And if you talk to someone who's not a believer and you tell them that I've decided that I want to empty out my accounts and follow God, first, they're looking at you like, what? You're going to do what? God's not asking you to do that, is he? I don't know if I could do that. And I heard that. But it wasn't so much about me emptying out my accounts. It was more about the condition of my heart, the willingness of me doing what I believe God wanted me to do. And that fear it took my breath away. I recall not being able to sleep for 2 weeks, wrestling with the thought of what in my head, what my head said versus what my heart said to do. And I got to the point where I recall having a discussion with God in the shower, like, we got to resolve this because I can't take this anymore. And the fear just had gotten to a point where I just needed to resolve it. And I realized that I couldn't be who I believe that God called me to be without being obedient. So I decided that I was going to walk off that cliff, and I just waited for the response. So I did walk off that cliff, and it was the scariest decision, I guess probably the scariest decision I've ever made in my life. And I walked off that cliff believing in God, and he had me. He took care of it. And it wasn't, I did make the offer on the house, didn't get the house. But it wasn't, I understood later that it wasn't about me buying the house. It was more about the lesson in what would I choose? Would I choose my fear as an excuse, or would I choose God? Would I choose losing what I thought I owned, but what I really didn't own? Because I didn't own anything. Was I going to let fear be the excuse? So I ended up, after that, I had the biggest relief after stepping out and being obedient to my biggest fear. There was a huge sense of relief, and then there was a huge sense of freedom. Freedom away from my own understanding, leaning on my own understanding, my system in my head that I thought that money was a cushion for safety, or that I had control over my life. And stepping out on obedience, stepping beyond the fear, it gave me that freedom. And that's the one thing, that's something about this process of living a life of purpose. You don't always know, well, I won't even say you won't always, you never know the answer to anything. You may have a piece of the vision, you may have a piece of the conversation, you may be prompted, but you don't know what God's full vision is. And because you don't have the answers, so human nature, you want to know the answer. So we're constantly at a struggle with our fear and our faith. So you're constantly being tugged. The flesh and carnal part of your life is challenged by the spiritual part of your life. So there's this constant tugging. But what I experienced in that freedom gave me something I totally did not expect, which was a sense of boldness. Because after I got over that fear of the idea of emptying my accounts to be obedient to God, there was nothing else that I needed to be afraid of, because I had crossed over or crossed out one of my fears. And that gave me the ability to use my gifts, use my talents, use what God gave me in different ways that I had never done before. Same person, same gifts and talents before with the fear. But after I had conquered that fear, those gifts and talents and skills, they just seemed to be amplified, because my mindset, my thinking was, I can do what God asked me to do. Because I started to realize, and it's definitely, it doesn't come all in one 5-minute conversation or session, but I started to realize after being obedient that I really didn't have to do anything. What I needed to do was to be righteous and to follow. And follow requires walking. And walking, you're going to walk in fear. I walked in fear when I was challenged about my finances. And along the way after that, I've had to walk through fear in other areas. And there's you have a choice. You can stand still and go, okay, this is where I'm going to stay. I'm not going to grow. I'm going to stay right here. But the problem is you're not going to grow. You're not going to expand. You're not going to learn. You're not going to experience new things. You're not going to be a resource for other people because you're standing still. You've essentially made up your mind that fear, that obstacle, that challenge, that assignment that God gave you to do, that test, that it is more powerful than your faith. It is more powerful than what God has told you to do. It is more powerful than who you say you are as a believer. So fear will make you stand still. Now, for those of us who decide to go on and walk, I even experienced a stalling. I was walking. God has given me a project to work on that I've been working on for the last 2 to 3 years. And I would look at that project and I'm like, you gave me this to do. How can I do this? And then I started over analyzing again, and then I started doubting myself, and then I started doubting, like, God, can I ask you for this? Am I worthy enough to ask you for this? Is this too big to ask for? And I found myself walking and being somewhat obedient, but there was no urgency. I was taking it at my own pace, hoping that God would change his mind and I wouldn't have to do what he asked me to do. And when I realized that was not being obedient and not being aligned to God's will, I said, no, you have to do what God asked you to do. And He will provide the way. He will provide the resources. He will provide the opportunities. I have to be available for those. I have to have my heart and my mind right. I have to be present with and ready to go and prepare myself for when I need to move forward. And prepare for me is reading and studying and asking God for healing and examining the condition of my heart, because my heart is what's going to move me. My head is not going to move me to follow, but I needed to examine those things, those hurts, those insecurities, that pride, that anger, feelings that I was still holding on to, and that were keeping me from being more open and receptive to God's word in my life and applying it to my life. So after I got to the point of, okay, look, you need to stop stalling. You need to move forward and walk in fear. Just walk. You can be afraid, but just walk. And what I found, and God is what I found is that when I started to examine my heart, the condition of my heart, and started clearing out a lot of that residual baggage, I found myself more open and receptive and to people, and my thinking changed, my speaking. I found myself that I understood that I needed to be righteous in order to do what God has asked me to do. So the more open I was, the more receptive I was to other people. And the more open I was, the more they were drawn to me. Different people, some believers, some not, but drawn to me and me drawn to them. And as I look back on this journey that I've taken for the last 2 to 3 years on this project, I did not orchestrate any of it. I did not plan any of it. I've been diligently at work preparing, but I am not making those connections. I am not diligently out seeking people to connect to. Those pathways are opening up by God's divine nature, His provision, His His purpose is weaved throughout this journey, and I don't fully know what the end will be, and that's not really the point for me to know. The point is for me to just keep walking, even when I don't understand, even when I'm confused, even when I don't have anyone to talk to, even when I feel like I'm alone. I just have to walk. And right now I'm looking at the budget for this project, and before I would have looked at the numbers and like, oh, how am I going to do this? And sort of panic and just want to just stall. But I'm not even overly concerned about it, because I know that God is going to make a way for it. He's going to provide for his purpose. And it's just flowing. It's just flowing from person to person, to resource, to opportunities, to moments that just click. So getting over the fear, and putting it in the right perspective, I should say, that God is in control and I'm not, that he knows what his purpose is, he knows what the vision is, and that I'm just a servant, a piece in the puzzle on this journey, and that there are other people who have purposes too. Believers and non-believers, they all have purposes, whether they know them or not. But all of our lives are weaved together towards God's purpose. And so that fear that I had 2 to 3 years ago, that took my breath away, I don't feel that anymore. I feel the peace that comes with knowing that God is in control and I'm not. And there's a great freedom, a liberty in just walking, just following. There's a great liberty in that. It takes the burden off of me, because it was never mine to carry. I am simply a vessel here for an appointed time to do God's purpose. So that is my stories. And as we go along, I will share more about my project and how how it's doing and how I am managing it, and when I say managing it, just how it's all unfolding. And so I just wanted to share that with you about fear, as you, as a believer, are being prompted to do God's will, to serve him, whether it be in your day-to-day, or whether it's in a project outside of your business or career or home life, or whatever God has for you. That is for you to do, and that is what we are to do. We are to follow, and how we follow is to simply walk, even when we are afraid. So this is Brenda Devine from Purpose 8 Institute. Hey, I'll talk to you in a little bit. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me on my podcast, Living a Life of Purpose, on Anchor and all other major podcast platforms. To learn more about Purpose 8 Institute and our ministry of sharing the importance of purpose, please visit our website, www.purpose8institute.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and even TikTok. If you would like to learn more about purpose beyond this podcast, Living a Life of Purpose, you can also purchase one of my books that are available on my website, purpose8institute.com, and also on Amazon.